I'm not from Wisconsin, but I lived there for a long time and worked there. And don't tell anybody from Wisconsin this, but I think Wisconsin sports fans are remarkable. Not just in a winning year like this year, but especially in those lean years, those guys are fiercely optimistic. Or maybe it's fiercely loyal, or maybe it's just not very smart. It doesn't matter if their team is 0-15, they seem to believe that this week they're going to get you no matter what. I noticed that even 35 years ago when I first lived in Wisconsin, the Badgers hadn't been to a Rose Bowl in way longer than the Gophers, and Brett Favre had not yet begun his Hall of Fame career, so it had been a long, dry spell for them. Didn't matter a bit. Every Wisconsin fan I knew was utterly convinced they were going to win this week, and big. It was going to be easy. I grew up in Minnesota, and the Minnesota fans I know are not like that. We love and support our team, but we have this deep belief that it's futile. Somehow, some way, no matter how good the season, we will find a way to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And every victory is evidence that soon, very soon, the other shoe will drop and disaster will ensue. We're kind of like Cubs fans used to be, although they're not that way anymore. Loyal, but really afraid to get excited. Maybe it's our Scandinavian German heritage. Maybe it's too many 6-0 starts only to end 9-7. I'm not sure. Football is kind of a silly pastime, but it is an example of Advent. Sometimes you're waiting expectantly on the edge of your seat. You can't wait for that next game to start. Sometimes you're rotting in the cellar. Both are part of following a team. Both are part of Advent, too. So whether you're a fiercely optimistic Wisconsin fan or a chronically despondent Minnesota fan, one thing is true of both. It does not matter how much you believe in your team. You cannot make them win, and you cannot make them lose. Our teams will do one or the other regardless of what we believe about them. And so being a fan is not about certainty, really. It's about a relationship with your team. Sometimes you feel confident, sometimes you're down in the dumps. Both are part and parcel of being a fan. And I think faith is like that too. Sometimes you feel full of the power of the Spirit. Sometimes you feel like God has abandoned you, or maybe God doesn't exist at all. Both and everything in between are part of faith. Faith is not certainty any more than believing the Packers will win is certainty. It might be hope, it might be nuts, but it's not certainty. Faith is a relationship with God, with all of its ups and downs. Just like being a Vikings fan is a relationship with all of its ups and downs. Mostly downs, it seems. And that's where John the Baptist was in our lesson for today. He'd known the mountaintop experiences, preaching out in the deserts when crowds were coming out to him, and now he was in a deep valley in Herod's prison, from which he would never emerge alive. He had lived his whole life for God. He'd given everything. And it just wasn't turning out like he expected. Are you the one, or should we wait for another? And Jesus gives an odd answer. He says, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them." Jesus quotes a passage from Isaiah, and John the Baptist would have known it well. They are words the prophet proclaimed when the people were still stuck in Babylon, prisoners, and it looked like they'd never get out. And God promised through Isaiah a new Exodus, bigger and better than the first Exodus. The first Exodus, God made a dry way in the sea. In this new Exodus, God would make a wet way in the desert, and everybody would go home. And they did, just like he promised. For John the Baptist, rotting in Herod's prison, those words were sweet music to his ears. God is still in control. The kingdom of heaven is not only coming, it's here. It would be like the scene that maybe you've seen in Hong Kong these past couple of months. Have you seen it? Hundreds of thousands, sometimes over 1 million protesters demanding justice and democratic freedoms. Thousands have been imprisoned, but they still keep demanding change. How good do you think it is for them to hear that all across the Western world, their cries for freedom are heard and being shared? How good is it for them to know that their life's work is not going unnoticed, that in fact, even in China, there are signs that freedom is coming? That's what Jesus' words meant to John. So what do we do with our doubts? Faith in Jesus is no easier now than it was in John's time. It's been, over 2,000 years after all. And faith seems to be under attack from every quarter. Jesus' words are also for you and me. So what do you think he would tell the messengers to tell us? What would he say? Maybe something like this. Remember those Swedish immigrants who wanted to start a church in Deerwood a few generations ago? Well, not only did they start it, but now thousands of people have been touched by its ministry. And not only that, but they are reaching out to places all around the world like Honduras and Haiti and Liberia, besides Deerwood and Brainerd and Aiken. Or maybe Jesus would talk about the women who gather every week to tie quilts and study the Bible. Maybe he'd mention the dozens of men at Teen Challenge whose lives have been turned around and they are singing with joy, and who got to give Christmas gifts to their kids this week. Or maybe he'd talk about the dozens of young people who came to the Christmas Make and Take, and the hundreds of kids who came to Trunks for Treats a couple months ago. Or maybe he'd talk about the people who bring Holy Communion to shut-ins, or bring prayer shawls to the sick. Or maybe he'd talk about the faith conversations happening between men on Friday mornings, or when they go fishing together in July. I hear those stories, and my faith is strengthened. Is yours? God is still alive and working right here, right now. And we can see the effects all over the place. The kingdom of heaven is not just coming, it's among us. The last half of the lesson, Jesus talks to the crowd about John the Baptist. They went out to see him not because he was a politician and changing his opinion whenever the wind blew a different direction. He wasn't like royalty, living in splendor and enjoying the finest of the finest. They went out to see a prophet, a person who would tell the truth to power, a person who would stand up to anybody, and more than a prophet. This one was a messenger preparing the way of the Lord. And finally, that line that he has at the very end, no human being ever born is greater than John the Baptist. Yet the least person in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he is. Huh? Well, first of all, I don't know about you, but that's pretty shocking. So John the Baptist, this guy in camel's hair and rotting in a prison, is greater than Moses or David or Caesar and Cleopatra or Aristotle or anybody else you could name? Really? And how is the least person in the kingdom of heaven greater than this guy? Have you ever seen the movie Bull Durham? Anyone seen that one? Some of you have seen it, okay. It's an old show, you don't have to go see it, but it's about a minor league catcher who sticks with it until he breaks the minor league home run record. Nobody had ever hit more home runs in the minor leagues than him. And yet, Any second string major leaguer would be greater than him. Everybody knows that, because the majors are way beyond anything that happens in the minors. Maybe it's something like that. John the Baptist announced the kingdom of heaven. That's wonderful. But Jesus actually brought it. And he brought us into it. I mean, do you hear how lucky we are? We've seen things so far beyond John's wildest dreams. We've seen the crucified and risen one that John could only hope for. We've seen how he changed history and how he continues to change history, one person at a time. It's a qualitatively different league altogether. Are you the one, or should we wait for another? John asked the question, but the truth is we ask it too sometimes. But we are so lucky because we have actually experienced his grace and love. We've actually heard his forgiveness. We've been fed at his table. And one day, we will hear him call out our names. And like Lazarus, we too will rise. Is he the one, or should we wait for another? Oh, he's the one, all right. So go and tell everyone the kingdom of heaven is at hand.